the man who was closer to me than my own father. I'll talk about those later, but so it took me 2 times starting the work to get through the work once. And having had a spiritual awakening as a result of the steps, that's when I believe the path really begins. That's when I believe, as like where Mark started in the reading, that's where I believe that the big book makes a major shift. They've asked you to look at your inventory. They've asked you to decide who you're going to ask. They've asked you the scenario for that it should be a closed-mouthed, understanding friend. Has anybody in the room ever had this experience? You're in inventory. You want to lock it in a briefcase, in the trunk, in the garage, lock it all up. Nobody can see it. And then you do a 5th step or a couple 5th steps. And the next day, you could share any of it with anybody in the world because you're free. There's nothing left to hide. And I can honestly say this to you. In all the inventories I've ever written, to this day, there's not one thing in any of those inventories that I couldn't say right here, right now. My first one, I remember. My first inventory was a big inventory. I had about 500 resentments. Lots of fears, lots of relationships to look at. I take it to my sponsor's house, and like I said yesterday, I had a big book with a leather cover. And in the inside of the leather cover, there was a flap here in the back page, and I stuck one thing that I wasn't never going to tell anybody. It was silly. I woke up in an apartment one day in New Orleans out of a blackout, and there's a transvestite prancing around the apartment, and I didn't want to know what went on, and I just left. I think blackouts are by the grace of God, actually. Right? If we saw all at one time everything we ever did in every blackout and everything that hasn't been revealed yet, I mean, we would just blow up into a million pieces. And I read everything else, and he described it, and I had heard it from him, but I didn't believe it, that in the Colorado State Penitentiary, in the middle of his first 5th step, well, actually, there were 2 things I remember about his first 5th step in the penitentiary. Here's a man who went from the Colorado State Penitentiary to working for the Department of Corrections for the state he was locked up in, Don P. from Denver. He's also a Lakota pipe carrier, which is unheard of for a white man. In his first 5th step, in the Colorado State Penitentiary, he went to one man because he was not going to read it to his sponsor. He went to this man, and they were sitting there, and Don would read something, and the guy would say, "Oh, that's not so bad." He'd say something else, the guy would say, "Oh, that's not so bad." And he had an awakening that if he continued to pick people like that, he was going to die an ugly alcoholic death. See, you didn't scare me when I was new that to drink is to die. You scared me that you might die an alcoholic death, which is usually long, painful, and ugly, and that I might go on feeling the way I was feeling 6 months sober for a long time. That was terrifying. Death might have been my only out when I got toward the end. I love when I meet a dope fiend or an alcoholic who said, I never attempted suicide, when every shot, every drunk, every blackout could have been death. The other experience he had in the penitentiary was that when he saw that going to those kind of people, see, hearing somebody's inventory is not about taking them off the hook. You might want to let them know that you're exactly the same and there's no difference between the two of you, but not that it's okay. Not that that stuff was okay. In California now, with new people in AA, there's a movement that you shouldn't have any shame or guilt. My God, if you lived anything like I did and you don't have any shame or guilt, there are places for people like that. They're called sociopaths. They have no conscience. I had a lot of shame. I had a lot of guilt. So his other awakening was that when he went to his sponsor and started to read this 5th step in the Colorado State Penitentiary, he realized for the first time in his life it was Don and another man, because his whole life it had always been Don and whoever he wanted you to be. For the first time in his life it was 2 people. I'm the kind of guy that will tell you a little bit, you a little bit, you a little bit, you a little bit, think I've shared my whole life with somebody where all I've done is tell you something so I can get what I want from you. I never laid the whole thing out for one person in my entire life. And there I am in the middle of my first 5th step. And by the time I read Resentment, it took us 3 days, and I'll tell you what this this sponsor of mine did to me in the middle of my fifth step. I read for one day, we weren't done with resentment. I read the next day, we were done with resentment. He said, I'm going to speak across town. I was used to that. He was trust delegate for Colorado at the time. We went across Denver into a big meeting I'd never been to. And for 200-300 people at a speaker meeting in Denver is a big meeting. And we're walking in. I'm 2 days into a 3-day fifth step. We walk into this church. He says, oh, I forgot to tell you. Now I am terrified whenever my sponsor says, oh, I forgot to tell you, right? Or like when your sponsor says, we need to chat. Don't ever think that means you're going to chat. That means you're going to shut up and sit there and listen, right? My sponsor is the kind of man with all the love in his heart. He'll say things to me like, I'll say to him, I feel inferior and insecure. His eyes lit up when I was new. He'd say, you want to know why you feel inferior and insecure? I said, yeah. He said, because you're inferior and insecure. That's such a simple answer for such a complicated person. And it freed me up. I told him one time I'm terribly afraid of my own mind. He said, you have good reason to be. So we're walking into this church. He says, oh, I forgot to tell you. I said, what? He said, you're speaking first. I had not read on in the book for a while what comes after a fifth step, because I wasn't done with the fifth step. I got up and I spoke, and standing there in front of 200 or 300 people, I experienced the fifth step promises. I was able to look the world in the eye. I was able to stand there as a man, and all those promises. I went home afterwards. It was like, wow, something had burst. The next day we finished fear and sex. And all of a sudden, the thing that I had hidden in my little flap in the back of my book was silly not to share, because he asked me, is there anything that you thought you would take to the grave that's not in the inventory? And I said, yeah, I got one. And there it was, and it was silly by the time I've also had these times where such an experience happens while you're writing, by the time you read, it's like comical. But I've also had these times where it doesn't touch you while you're writing, and while you're reading, boom, it hits you. Yeah. And I got through that first fifth step, and it was me and a guy named Don, and no longer who I wanted him to be. And yeah. So, after 5 years, all of a sudden I find myself in Los Angeles through an experience of making amends to someone I'd been engaged to. And this is a woman that wasn't even sure she could see me the day before I made those amends. We had been engaged. She had lived in Denver. I'm coming out to LA to make amends. She said, I don't know if I can see you. I'll pray about it. I called her the next day. She said, well, I talked to your sponsor, and I talked to my sponsor, and I've decided to meet you on my terms and on my turf, be at my mother's house tomorrow at 6 o'clock. I got there, and she's in the program, and we'd been engaged. I'd caused some real harm. She'd moved back to LA. Day before, she wasn't sure she could see me. And at 6 p.m., I started to talk about why I was there and the harm I was clear on. And I asked a question I was directed to ask in that amends. Is there anything else I've ever done that hurt you? When I looked up, it was 9:30 in the evening, and she was still talking. And the guilt and the shame and the pain in that room was thick. And then I got to another question. Do you need to tell me how any of that hurt you? And when I looked up, it was 11:30 in the evening, and she was still talking, and something in the room was shifting. Because she got to talk about what I did that hurt her and how that might have hurt her. And when she finished, and I asked her, is there anything I could ever do to make this right? She said, take me to San Francisco next week on your vacation as a friend and be in LA twice a month. We'll go to therapy and see if we can work it out, or at least end it in a healthy way, because neither of us have ever ended a relationship in a healthy manner. And out of my mouth came, I'll find a way to do that. The next night, before we went to San Francisco together as friends, a lady mentioned an apartment on the beach in Santa Monica for $500 a month on the beach with rent control. And she didn't even know I was there to make amends in LA, or that I'd been asked to be in LA twice a month, and I took that apartment and I went to therapy. I was totally against therapy at the time because I used to be a therapist. It doesn't work for me. I had the wrong view. You know, when you haven't found out the answer to what's wrong with me as a client, maybe you'll find out the answer to what's wrong with me as a therapist. I'm either a counselor or a client, nothing in between. People thought I was a counselor to help other people. I was a counselor to find out the answer to that question, what's wrong with me? And I had a bad attitude about I used to go off in meetings about therapy and therapists. I hated myself. My God. How could you like what you've been? And a lady came up to me, and so all of a sudden I'm there twice a month. All of a sudden Mark's driving out my other car, and I gave up the house with him that we were sharing in Denver, and I'm living in LA, and we go to therapy for several months and find out we're not two people that should be together, and we're still great friends. And all of a sudden I'm in LA, and the next time through the work I'm about 5-6 years sober, and I got to inventory, and I finished that inventory in a workshop setting where 20-30 people sitting at a table for 6-12 months go through the work together. I got a finished inventory, and my head said to me, Don Pritz is the only man that can hear this inventory. And my next thought was, what would ever happen if something happened to Don? I called Don, I called Mark actually, and he said, you ought to let some people that where you live now get to know you on that basis. And I called Paul Martin, and he talked to me about the benefit of fist stepping with more than one person. And I visited Denver, and I read to Don. I came back to LA, I read to a few people that I was working with, and they saw that I was human too. And I've never done one fist step since. I've always done multiple. I'm a mad dog. If one is good, I got to go to the top of the chart, right? And I was about 10 years sober, so I'd been in LA for 5 years, and I saw my grand sponsor, Gary Brown, at the Music City Roundup in Nashville. And he was different. He was on fire, and he was 26 years sober. I said, Gary, what have you done? He said, well, I took an inventory up to Paul in Chicago, and I read several fist steps to several different people from his group. And they sat with me and talked about 6, 7, and 8 when we were done. And I got in touch with some financial amends I hadn't seen in 26 years, some old, some new. I went home to Indianapolis, talked to my wife. She agreed. We sold the house, big house, nice house. Moved into a trailer, paid off those amends, and I'm more free than I've ever been in 26 years. And I thought, my God, somebody with that amount of time willing to go to that length. So what do? My next inventory, I'm going to visit my family in Battle Creek. And I called Paul Martin. I said, I'm going to be in Michigan. Can I come to Chicago with an inventory? He said, come on. I had no idea why he was laughing when he said that. Went to Michigan to see my family. I had no idea what I was in store for. Went to Michigan to see my family, drove to Chicago. He said, be here on a Thursday, stay till Sunday. Great. Got there on a Thursday, took me to their home group. Great meeting. They talk about a step a week. Went back to the hotel, and before I got into my room, he hands me a mimeograph sheet. It says Friday, 9 o'clock, Charlie. 1 o'clock, Sam. 4 o'clock, Harry. Saturday, 9 o'clock, 1 o'clock, 4 o'clock. Sunday, 9 o'clock, 1 o'clock, 4 o'clock. I'm going to read 9 times. I went to my room and I thought, this is going to be like a retreat. So I'm a mad dog, right? If a little's good, a lot's better. Called down to the desk, said, turn off the phone, come take the television, and did 18 one-hour meditations and 9 fist steps in 3 days. I did an hour meditation before and after each fist step. Read it to guys from 6 months to 50 years. Another guy whose story is in the big book. And I came out of that room different. Changed. I remember after about the 6th one on Saturday, it was like one of those, you know those movies where they're interviewing babysitters and it just goes from one to the next and each one's like, everyone was a different experience. And what they would do is they would listen to mine and give me feedback. No, they would read theirs. These guys in Paul Martin's group in Chicago keep current inventory just to read to people that come from out of state. They have stories about people with 20 years, 30 years coming, suffering from depression, leaving Chicago in a different state. And after the 6th one on Saturday, I wanted to just start screaming and get on the phone and talk to somebody, you know? And I knew to just sit and be quiet. And, you know, I don't know if I would ever do 9 fist steps in 3 days again, but it was a valuable experience. And what they believe is they learned from Dr. Harry Tiebout, who Paul Martin knew. Paul Martin was brought in by Dr. Bob. He was one of the second or third member of AA in Chicago after Paul Stanley. And What they learned is very simple. The more people you open yourself up to, the more open you are. And I lost the illusion that my sponsor was the only person that could hear that inventory. And I've never done one fifth step since. And most people that I'm hearing their fifth step for the first time, I don't encourage them to do multiple fifth steps. One's enough when you're new and you're just trusting somebody for the first time. But like this last one, I read to Mark. We were both in New York, and I think it was August. And then I read to two people in New York that I sponsor. One has known me for 13 years, but he never heard an inventory of mine, and that was very beneficial for our relationship. And the third one was a woman that I sponsor in New York, who I had just met. I'd only known for 6 years, and she's 15 years sober. She heard it. And I get a different perspective when I listen to and realize how much I discount for years the value you can get from women, how much they have to give. And vice versa. Women have told me that too. And then I went home, so I had done 3. Mark, the guy I've sponsored in New York for 13 years, and the lady I've just known for 6 years, and went home and read to the Steel on Steel group that I'm in, to 6 men on a weekend retreat that we had. And I got to tell you, every time I've done more than one fifth step, when I get to these 6-step questions, there's no resistance. So I've been fortunate to read fifth steps. I've been fortunate to hear fifth steps. One of the experiences I remember the most was a guy that he had read his resentment and fear inventory, and the next day he came over and we were going to read the sex inventory, and he said, "I have something to tell you." I knew he was going to tell me. I said, "What is it?" He said, "I'm gay." I said, "Great, read your inventory." He said, "But I have another thing to tell you." I said, "What?" He said, "I've never had sex with an animal or a I said, "What?" He said, "I've never had sex with an animal or a I didn't understand what you said. He said, "I've never had sex." I said, "How do you know you're gay?" He said, "Because I've had imaginary relationships in my mind for 45 years, but I've never had sex." And I'm sitting there thinking how different we are. And I said, "What'd you write?" He said, "I've wrote about all these relationships I've had in my mind my whole life because I was so ashamed of being gay. I've never had a relationship." And I'm thinking how different we are. He starts to read his inventory, and about 20 minutes into it, there's a pause. Nothing was said. He paused. I paused. And in that moment, we both realized we were exactly the same. That his selfishness, dishonesty, self-seeking, and fear took him to nothing, and that mine took me to everything. But we were no different at the core. We got free of feeling different. You know, that's what happens in a fifth step. You're admitting to yourself, to God, and another human being that you're all connected and you're all the same. You know, have you ever really heard anything in a fifth step you haven't done yourself? A couple. I've heard some great stories, though. Bob Olson heard the story of a man who was under the witness protection program, and he heard some real stuff in this fifth step. And the guy later went out and drank and put a contract on Bob Olson's life because he heard about these murders he'd committed. Bob Olson had to go to this biker gang that had the contract in Denver and explain that you trust God. You trust God. So then what do? Then you return home. You find a place where you can be quiet. You review the first 5 proposals. Have I admitted anything? And that's when knowing the foundation, the cement, the cornerstone, the keystone, and what the foundation stone is going to be in your life is important. Imagine this. Imagine you've worked with a sponsor who hasn't really been thorough, but they make the mistake of, after the fifth step, sending you home to read Returning Home. And you get to questions like, carefully read the first 5 proposals, ask if you admitted anything. Okay, that sounds fine. For you're building an arch through which you'll walk a free man at last. Well, you know, that's where Bill gets kind of lofty. Is the work solid so far? That makes sense. Are the stones properly in place? And you haven't been thorough. What stones? We know now. Have you skimped on the cement put into the foundation? What's the foundation? Step 1. What's the cement? Sharing in a common problem. Equal parts, sharing in a common solution. The cornerstone was my willingness to believe at step 2. The keystone was at step 3. I know now what the stones are, what the foundation is. and what the cement is. And have I tried to get mortar without sand? Have I tried to get recovery without fellowship? Or fellowship without recovery? Sometimes I've had to do that. I've had to do returning home more than once. And now I believe that between page 75 and 76, it makes a major shift. Think of everything before 75 that it says about your mind, your best thinking, even when your motives are good, all this stuff. And now they ask. Now, how do I say that? Because the first line on the first sentence on page 76 says, when you can answer to your satisfaction. They're saying, start to trust. Then look at step 6. We've emphasized willingness as being indispensable. I think sometimes I'm a little above willingness and I just breeze past that sentence. Oh, I'm way past willingness. I'm totally ready. And then they ask me, are you? Are you really? Are you now ready to let God remove from you all the things which you have admitted are objectionable? Yes. Can He now take them all? Every one. I've never had a problem with can He, but I add to that there. Will He now take them all? Ooh, I don't know. Oh, that's why willingness is indispensable. I'm willing to believe that He will. Then the kicker. Am I still clinging to something that I'm not willing to let go? I think that's one of the most overlooked questions. There's already not much on step 6 because step 6 ain't about you fixing nothing. It's about giving it all to God. I love when I hear somebody say, I finished my 5th step. I went home. My sponsor emailed me a list of my character defects and the order that I'm going to work on them in. How sad. You know how you've done 6 and 7? You know how you know when you've done 6 and 7? When you're doing 8. When you're willing to let it all go, the good and the bad. You don't even know the difference between your assets and your liabilities anymore. Half the stuff you thought was good was killing you. Half the stuff you thought was bad brought you to a God. You don't know the difference. That's why 7 says the good and the bad. But I have people now, whether it's their first time or their 20th time, if there's anything they're still clinging to that they're not willing to let go, it doesn't say stop doing by tomorrow. It says, are you still clinging to something that you're not willing to give to God, to let go of? Write it down. Be honest. Locate yourself. I'm really not willing to let go of this, this, and this. And like Mark said, multiple 5th steps has taken any resistance out of that question, out of the picture. But if there is something I'm not willing to let go of, I write it down. Sit with it. Honestly admit your unwillingness and be with that for a few days. And it will shift. And one day you'll wake up and you'll go, I'm ready. Because here now they make another assumption that you've got something in your life to trust. When ready. Not when your sponsor says you're ready to do step 7. Not when you've answered to his satisfaction the returning home questions. When you've answered to your own satisfaction. And when you know that you're ready, you say something like this. I'd like to read the original 7-step prayer written by Dr. Bob for Clarence Snyder. He said here, Dear God, I'm coming to you on my knees in all humility to humbly ask you to forgive all my past wrongs and to remove all my defects of character. I want to start a new life today, and I ask you to help me to do so and to keep helping me if I keep asking. In step 3, I turned my will and my life over to your care. I decided to turn my will and my life over to your care. Thank you for taking complete control of my life, and thank you for this opportunity to wipe my slate clean and start my life anew. In step 4, 5, 6, I have completed my moral inventory and admitted to myself and another person the exact nature of my wrongs. I now admit these wrongs to you, God. I'm entirely ready to ask and pray now that you please remove from me every single defect of character. Specifically, I ask you to remove the following shortcomings listed in my 4-step moral inventory. Read aloud here those defects from your list. Thank you, God, for this opportunity for a new beginning in my life and a chance to be a part of the solution in life instead of the problem. Please grant me wisdom, knowledge, and strength as I go out from here to do your work and to live the victorious life you have designed for me. Thank you, God, for the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous, which will make your plan for my life clear to me. Thank you and praise your name. Amen. I think there's a miracle at each step, but I think the real miracle of each step is in the action of the next. You want to know when you've done step 3? When you got out a piece of paper and a pen and you're writing your list. You want to know when you've done 6 and 7? When you got a piece of paper out and you're making your list. And now you make that list. And I think myself, Mark, a lot of people I know have made a mistake over the years with ourselves and with other people. And that is to not spend more time on the second half of step 8. The list is easy. You made it when you took inventory. Before you finish that list, you ask, Dear God, please show me any people or institutions or any amends that I'm not aware of that were not in my inventory, and you work on that list until you know it's done. And you know when you know it's done? When you know it's done. It's done. Now, while you're making amends, some other names might come. Boom, you put them on your list. We were taught to fill out cards. And on those cards, we put the person's name, address, phone number, or the word find, if you don't know where they are. And we put on the rest of the card the harm that we're aware of. And the mistake that we made, maybe it wasn't a mistake, maybe it was actually what was supposed to happen, but I believe one of the mistakes I've made over the years is to think I have the luxury to know which are big, small, in between, which ones I'm willing to do, not willing to do, and I'd put them in piles. Willing to do and know where they are. Willing to do, don't know where they are. Not willing to do and know where they are, and not willing to do and don't know where they are. And I was told to get the willingness to do the ones I'm not willing to do, I should start with the pile that I'm willing to do and I know where they are, and I'll watch the other piles decrease from my willingness. And the first time I didn't get through amends. The second time I was given the grace and the power to get through amends. And now I think it's important for people that have been around, as Mark encouraged me to do this time, was to stay with the 8th step until I was willing to make amends to them all. My sponsor told me he got free in the Colorado State Penitentiary on the second half of step 8, before they even let him out. He experienced the 9-step promises because of complete willingness. The freedom in 9 comes from the willingness in 8. And remember, it says in that step, all, twice. Made a list of all the people we had harmed and became willing to make amends to them all. Now, I started to wonder the other day what they mean by the 9th step. Made direct amends to such people. I think such people means all the ones on my list. And I start making amends. And I start watching amazing things happen. And that's where I'd like to stop for now and see what Mark has to say.
I want to read a few things to you from this tool that I use for the 6th step, and then I'll leave a couple copies with Ralph, and you and he can work out how, if you want copies. It's just called the Sacrament of Pence, the 7 deadly sins, but it starts out by taking the first deadly sin, pride. It gives a definition. Putting self in the place of God as the center and objective of our life, or of some department thereof. It is my refusal to recognize my status as a creature dependent on God for my existence and placed by Him in a specific relationship to the rest of His creation. And then under pride, so I asked myself, based on the inventory I just read, am I guilty of this or not? Guilty. And then there's subheadings, forms of pride, irreverence. Example of irreverence. Failure to thank God or to express my gratitude adequately. Sentimentality. Being satisfied with pious feelings and beautiful ceremonies without striving to obey God's will. Presumption. Dispensation of myself from ordinary duties on the grounds that I'm a superior person. Guilty. Satisfaction of complacency over my spiritual achievements. Preference for my own ideas, customs, schemes, and techniques. Unwillingness to surrender in to and abide in God, to let God act in and through me. Here's distrust. Worry, anxiety, misgivings, perfectionism. oversensitive. Expectation others will dislike, reject, or mistreat me. Over readiness to interpret their attitude or quick to take offense. Am I the only one that relates to all these? Unfounded suspicion. Surrender to feelings of depression, gloom, pessimism, discouragement, self-pity, or fear of death. Here's disobedience. Check this out. Rejection of God's known will in favor of my own interest or pleasures. Absorption in my own affairs, leaving little time, energy, or interest for the things of God. Violation of confidence. And it has a bunch more. Vanity, this is all under pride. Under vanity, pretense to virtues I do not possess, false humility, harsh judgment on others for faults I excuse in myself, undue concern or expenditure of time, money, or energy on looks, dress, surroundings in order to impress others, seeking, desire, or relishing flattery or compliments. How about this? Arrogance, insisting others conform to my wishes, recognize my leadership, accept my own estimate, my own worth. Overbearing, argumentative, opinionated, and obstinate. Definition of anger: open rebellion against God or my fellow creatures. Sole purpose and desire is to eliminate any obstacle to my self-seeking, to retaliate against any threat to my security, to avenge any insult or injury to my person. Wow. And all I do is I go through these. Then, of course, you have envy. I love this. Under envy, they have a section called malice. Ill will, false accusation, slander, backbiting. This one I love. The initiation, collection, and retailing of gossip against another.
The initiation and what?
Collection and retailing of gossip against another.
Collection. Ooh.
Yeah, they've got greed. Under greed, they list inordinate ambition, domination, and then, of course, gluttony, lack of discipline, use of sickness as a means of escape from my responsibilities.
The big book says it's progress, not perfection.
How about this under gluttony? Neglect of bodily health, not getting sufficient rest, recreation, exercise. I mean, these are all defects. And the moral of the story is, ladies and gentlemen, if you go through this, if you have any form of spiritual pride, I assure you it will be stripped of you. Sloth is the last one, of course.
Keep in mind the 12 and 12 does go into these 7 deadly sins, and the people we know use these at different points.
Yep.
You can use it to help you with your 4th column. You can use it to help you with 6 and 7. You can also use it to help you to get in touch with the nature of harm for 8 and 9.
Yep. So that's the tool I use for the 6th step. I get done with that. I like to take a yellow highlighter in the inventory I just read. I like to highlight what I'm guilty of. Of course, if I was more intelligent, I would just dip it in yellow and go. And I would like to tell you that last year that my marks on this get better. They don't. Let me tell you the experience behind that. I think that's important. Is it makes me see the truth of myself. I know how much I am loved by God and how much I love God, and this is the truth of me. That without God, the manifestation of all this. And if this is true of me, it is true of you. And it takes me back to that 4th step where you're spiritually sick and I'm spiritually sick. And I see how much I need God in my life and God's power in my life. And what it does, I think it's a wonderful tool in preparation for the 9th step. Because it takes away any pride I have about making this amend, or any fear or any arrogance or anything else. And all I'm doing is I got one spiritually sick person going to another to clean up something in the past. That's why it had such a profound effect upon me then, as it still does to this day. And then so I do that in the 7th step. And then, like Joe said, my 8th step. I got a bunch of names and institutions and principles from my list when I wrote my inventories, did my fear, wrote my sex inventory, and then I like to spend some time in prayer to show me any of the harm that I put out. I'll give you an example. I missed it for years. Mother Earth is a living, breathing organism, and I was 12 or 13 years sober before I realized the harm that I've done to Mother Earth. I was born in 1946. We had years, you know what I mean? Drive down the road, all the litters out. All kinds of things. Complete disrespect for Mother Earth. I would never have realized that. Is there things I can do to clean that up? Absolutely. I don't ever litter. For quite some time, probably once every couple of weeks, I'd just take a large garbage bag and I'd just, where I was living, I'd just start walking and filling it up. I'm still doing that stuff today out at the ranch. I got a hold of the county. We adopted a 4-mile stretch, and then every Saturday for 3 hours once a month. That's what the clients do, as a way of them making amends to Mother Earth, as they go up and down these roads, and they clean all that up. That's one example that I could give you. Amends to some churches and institutions that I slandered. Go visit, go attend their services, go talk to the man who does it. I had a lot of amends in several different states. You know, you start with the ones closest to you. I'm like Joe, I don't have one amend that's any bigger than any other. What I'm trying to do is set right the past so I can be present to the moment. Although I had to laugh, I was reading something not that long ago. The CIA classifies lies in 6 different categories and give them a color code. And I've often thought, you know, it's like amends. Paul M. said one time, we don't mind making amends, but God, we hate paying the money back. Here's the deal with the money. It's not my money. I'm a steward of their money. If I owe financial amends, here's how it looks. I'm working, I'm sober, I get a paycheck, their money comes to me, and I'm a steward, and then I just release it over here to them. So you get done, and you get done with this list, and when you make the 8-step list, do it free of any judgment. If it shows up in your list, you're probably going to do something with it. So you get done, and you've got this list. And now I think something that Joe said that was important. You should have some idea. So you start with the first name in the list, and what you're looking for is, what's the nature of the harm? What was my part in this? What did I do? And I think it's important to get clear on that, to write all that stuff out, and so you go through it. And what I like to do if I'm sponsoring somebody, and we get to the 8-step, and then sometimes this will take 2-3 weeks, maybe even a month. It depends on how extensive their list is. We're going to sit down and go through every single one of those amends. Now, Joe said something I think is very, very important. Always remember this, if you're sponsoring people, you will transmit what you have, but you cannot transmit what you don't have. If you have a lot of unfinished amends, you're going to transmit that to the people that you work with. If you've made all your amends, you're going to transmit that to the people you work with. Does that make sense? That's why, again, I like to work with people with this book and these instructions right in front of me. Because that way I'm not going to change it. I'm going to dice it up. I'm not going to mix it up. So we sit down and we begin to go through this list. All the financial ones that you have, all that kind of stuff. All the people, all the institutions. And you're sitting there also and you're trying to ascertain some things. Of course, whenever possible, you want to make the amends face to face. That can't always be. Big Book says you send a letter. Of course, you know, if you think about amends, there's it might be mine. Face to face, and then of course there's calling people, and then of course there's writing people, right? And then of course, like Joe said, graveyard amends. So you get done with this list and you sit down with your sponsor and you get clear on all that. And then you just begin the process. Remember, when you get to the 9th step, the book says, remember, Mark, you agreed at the beginning, you'll go to any lengths for victory over alcohol. They remind you at the beginning of the night, you're getting ready to go out and make amends, is when they begin to remind you, die an alcoholic death, go make amends. Okay? Unbeknownst to me, till I had a lot of experience with amends, is that unfinished business from my past will always distort my present. It will distort every relationship I have, from work, men, women, myself, everything. And because if you have much experience with amends, you've seen as you went through the amends process, every single area of your life begin to improve and get better. As I paid back more money, the jobs I began to get paid more money. Sure, that's a coincidence. As I made relationships to family members and moved through that whole process, relationships with them got better. So everything is connected. As I cleaned up the past, my present, it got a lot more easy for me to be in my own skin. I got a lot more comfortable with you. See, in the fifth step, you disconnect from ego. In the seventh step, you connect from God with God, and in the ninth step, you connect with your fellow human beings in terms of the oneness. And unfinished amends, particularly if you got a lot of them, will prevent you from having that experience. See, I don't know how you experienced this. When I walked into this room, and I know very few of you, from the first moment I got here to right now, I have been totally at peace and totally calm inside. And I'm very connected to every single one of you. I promise you, when I started making amends, that was not the experience I was having. If I walked into a room like this, I wasn't connected to any of you, and there was a shield between me and you. Absolute shield. And it was there, and as I began to make amends, this shield started to come down. I did have a sense of not being attached to my ego, and I certainly felt the nearness of God, but I wasn't connected to you, because I still had all this unfinished stuff that I had it floating around out in the universe. So you begin that journey to clean all that stuff. Off my original list, it took me 17 years to finalize all the approaches on everything that was on that list. I used to get resentful when I read about the early members of AA because they all lived in the same town, so they finished amends in about 2 days, or all the approaches. But I lived in Iowa, I lived in South Dakota, I lived in California, Oregon, Washington, Alaska, and Colorado. 7 states. You willing to go to any length? Yeah, willing to go to any length. So it took me quite a while. And I'll talk more about it. I hadn't paid taxes in 7 years. Internal Revenue Service. I joke about that, but that is the longest relationship I've ever had in my life. 14 years. Amazing things happen when I sent them that final check. Everything is connected, right? Everything is connected. We do steel on steel. One of the questions we ask in steel on steel, if you're making financial amends, particularly if you want to go out and start buying a lot of stuff, is do you think you can stay sober stealing from these people a second time? See? In other words, I'll give you an example. That one time a guy shows up, he's got a car, it's paid for, it's an older car, it runs well. And we'd gone 2 weeks without meeting. He was making financial amends. He owned a lot of back child support. The wife had let him come back into the child's life, and he had a relationship with her. And he comes to Steel on Steel, and he reports that he's going to buy a Z28. And being a good alcoholic, he gives us 29 reasons why he's going to do that. Payment on that Z28 was $500 a month. He had no payment at all on his other car, the old beater that still ran well. So this was $500 he was going to once again steal from his daughter, and I asked him the question, do you believe that you can stay sober stealing from your daughter a second time? He didn't buy the car. Thank God, he said later, thank God I had people who cared enough about me to bring that to my attention. Because he said I probably would have got drunk about that. Because his conscience for years ate his lunch about not being able to fulfill his obligation to that woman and to his daughter. So that's really what begins to happen in the 9th step. Levels of freedom beyond your wildest dreams. I had worked for several large companies. 3 of them are Fortune 500 companies. My inventory revealed that I didn't give them a fair day's work, and I made an agreement when I went to work in exchange for X amount of dollars, this is what I would give them. I didn't give them that. So I had to approach them all. And I chose a figure that I felt I'd cheated them out of. One company literally, I figured I gave them $2,000 worth of work. This was back in 1978, and I worked for them a year, and I think I saw my boss 2 times, and I estimated I might have earned $2,000 of the $28,000 that they paid me in 1978. And I had taken the expense account to the tune of about 12 grand. So I got a hold of their human resources department and talked to them, and I went over the nature of the harm and told them that I was willing to pay back over $35,000. And of course, the guy didn't have the slightest clue what to do with this guy. What do you do? What do you do with it? You did what? Yeah, I was drinking all the time. I didn't really work for you. Really. So he checks the records, and that particular year I was selling chain, and they had the biggest snowstorm in the history of Colorado, so I'd sold $6 million worth of chain, but it had nothing to do with me. It just snowed a lot that winter, that's all. So I explained all that to him, and I explained how I'd padded the expense account, and I used it to buy alcohol, and used it to do dope. And so anyhow, I said, well, let me get back to you. So he called back a little bit later. He said to me, I very much, he said, we very much appreciate what you're doing. We wouldn't have the slightest clue on how to do that, but you did ask me what you could do, so here's what it is. Don't ever apply for a job with us again. Thank you very much. Boom. So work amends. As I made these amends to these companies, I'll give you another example of amends maybe you hadn't think about. How many people in here smoke? Raise your hands. Okay? In your days when you're drinking, and probably even sober, if you're a smoker and you work for companies, I don't know about you, but my job description has never said you can take time out to smoke while I'm paying you during the course of the day. And my inventory revealed that, if you're going to smoke a pack of cigarettes a day and you want to take, I don't care, 5 minutes, I don't care if you want to take 5 minutes for 10 cigarettes. I looked at the number of hours and the amount of money I cheated all these companies out of, and became willing to make amends for that. I mean, when I went to work for the man that I work for right now, because I'm a smoker, and I got very clear with him on the front end. I'm not here to steal from you, and I'm a smoker, so every time I smoke a cigarette, I'm stealing from you, so here's what my commitment to you is. This is the number of hours you're going to get from me. He just looked at me. See, you start working this program, this manner of living demands rigorous honesty. Joe and I joke about this, but we can't even do by mistake the shit we used to do on purpose. Because it bothers us too much. I mean, I pay my bills way ahead of time. Why? Well, I don't know about you, but the electric company in Dallas is kind enough to float me electricity for 30 days, and then they'd like to be paid by a certain date. There was a time that wouldn't have bothered me, so I do it. This has happened to me too. You go shopping in those little things you put under your plants so the water doesn't, I don't know what you call them. I get home not that long ago, and two of them are stuck together, and I'd paid for one. I thought, well, I'll get to it later. This voice starts screaming at me. You stole it, you stole it, you stole it. All right, that's enough. Get in my car, go back. I go back here. She says, what are you doing? This is not mine. They're stuck together. It's here. Bye. And I leave. I'm the guy that used to put guns in your faces, for God's sakes. You see what? This program turned you into a square. You cannot violate your conscience and live comfortably in your own skin. I pay my taxes. I have a CPA. I pay them every dime they got coming. See, all this allows me to exist within my skin and exist with you with calmness and peace and power and dignity in my life. Now, that's not how it was when I started my amends process at all. So I've had incredible experiences over the years in the process of amends. Joe and I tomorrow, I'm sure, will talk with you all a little bit more about that. For God's sakes, don't miss out on these amends. The healing that takes place, the power that comes into your life, the freedom that you have beyond anything you can imagine. That's all I got for tonight.
We'll see you at 10 o'clock tomorrow morning.
I'm Mark. I'm an alcoholic. If you have your big book, 86, step discipline, and then we'll have a few moments of silence so that we can go inside and experience some conscious contact free from our mind. The word, the strict spiritual disciplines of my first 10 years in the program, I was not consistent with them. And like everything else, it seems like in my life, there's always a two-headed coin on anything. I got to experience the effect produced by being inconsistent with the discipline of 10 and 11. And then my second 10 years, from 1991 to now, or actually 1992, having reached a place where that which God has made left me empty, sober, so there's nothing left but God, I made a commitment to practice these spiritual disciplines exactly as they're outlined in the book every single day till I died. And now I have a 10-year history of experiencing the effects of that, and I am happy to report I prefer the last 10 over the first 10. So, but they are strict spiritual disciplines. You have to decide how much of this you want. You go to the ocean with a thimble, you get a thimble full of water. How much of God do you want to know? My experience is you're going to have to make that decision. I would hope that what happened to me happens to you, and that is when the world and what the world has to offer leaves you empty, there's only one thing left, and that's knowing God. And nothing else will quench your thirst. And then, paradoxically, as you go through that experience, once that happens, and then you come to know God in a whole nother way, now a lot of things that you've heard all your life begin to make sense. Things like wear the world like a loose garment. I know experientially exactly what that means. It means that I stay connected to my life, and I'm not too concerned about my life situation because it always changes. You wear the world like a loose garment. Seek ye first the kingdom, the rest will be added unto you. I know exactly what that means today. And all those things that I heard for years that I could not understand because they're designed to speak to the language of the Spirit, not your mind. That's why they don't make any sense. So, one of the things I do is when I get up in the morning, I have some meditation books, and I consistently open my big book to page 86, and I begin to read this and do what it says, so I wanted to do that with you this morning. It says, on awakening, let me think about the 24 hours ahead. Now again, I'm going to consider my plans for the day, and then I like to stop there. I find that when I get up, very quickly I've learned to turn my thoughts to God. It might just be simple things. Thank you for the day. Thank you for breath. I will be done. Because if I don't, this committee that I have that I've told you about, they start to show up for their meeting. And so I literally, upon awakening, as soon as my eyes come open, I literally will start this internal dialogue of thy will be done. Thank you for life. Thank you for breath. Thank you for this day. And then get the coffee going and sit down. And then I open this book up. And I work off a notebook and a day planner. So when I consider my plans for the day, I stop and I pull it and I look at it. Like this morning, I did a meditation. I met with a person at 7. I met with Greg and Diane in Arkansas at 7:30. Then we went over and met with the committee people and had breakfast together in fellowship and came here. I'm going to leave here, go check out of a hotel. I'm going to get on the plane. I'm going to go back. I'm going to go for a 3 or 4 mile run. Then this evening, I'm going to find some action adventure movie in which I can go brain dead for a while, say some prayers, go to bed. That's my day. Consider my plans for the day. And then now I'm going to move on. Before I begin my day, God, please direct our thinking this day. The 11th step is very much about your thought life. Pay attention to your thought life. And I'm going to especially ask God that my thinking be divorced from self-pity, dishonest, or self-seeking motives. Under these conditions, meaning being divorced from that, asking God to direct my thinking, I can now employ my mental faculties with assurance, for God gave me brains to use. That's an incredible promise and a tool to work with. My thought life, circle the word thought life. My thought life will be placed on a much higher plane when my thinking is cleared of the wrong motives. Not long ago, I read in a book, and I don't know how they come up with this, but the book said, it was written by a guy that has a PhD, it probably has some credibility, but he says the average human being has a minimum of 50,000 thoughts a day, most of which we're asleep to. And here's the horrible thing about being asleep to your thought life. You and I are made in the image of God. We are a part of God. God is a creation machine, and one of the ways you create is with your thoughts. And so what if you're asleep to 90% of them? In other words, I believe there's a lot to be said about we create the way we experience the reality of our life. I made a decision several years ago to get a lot more involved with that. So you begin to start to pay attention to your thought life, the things that you're saying to yourself. And then you begin to have to use some of the 10th and 11th step tools to shift and change your thought life. You start to become judgmental, turn. Start to become fearful, turn. But if you're asleep to your thought life, you get in the middle of the maelstrom before you even have an awareness you were even headed toward it. Greg's wearing a t-shirt that if you ask me, what is your goal till you die? It's on his t-shirt. Wake up. Wake up. That's it. So my thought life will be on a much higher plane when my thinking's clear of the wrong motives. Most people don't have any sense of awareness. The term thought life is in there. Your thoughts have a life of their own, and they will dictate how you experience yourself and your world. Start to wake up to what you're saying to yourself. Now, in thinking about this day, I may face indecision. I may not be able to determine which course to take. So here's an incredible prayer. God, grant me inspiration, intuitive thought, or decision. Joe and I use this all the time. All the time. You get asked to speak or do something. We don't just say, oh yeah, we'd love to do that. We work with this stuff all the time. He'll tell you about a dream of his that's coming to fruition. You work with it. Grant me inspiration, intuitive thought, or decision. Relax and take it easy. What a concept for people like us. Relax and take it easy. Can you trust God throughout the course of the day? Relax and take it easy. We do not struggle. By the way, it's almost impossible to practice, let alone understand any of this, without having done some work in the first 9 steps. It's almost impossible. They're words on a page, but there's no power to practice this. We're often surprised how the answers come. What used to be a hunch or occasional inspiration gradually becomes a working part of my mind. You have a thinking mind and a working mind. The working mind's what I use when I set my alarm clock, shave, do those kinds of things. My intent is to use my working mind and avoid my thinking mind. Being inexperienced, having just made conscious contact with God, is not a problem. I'm going to be inspired. I may pay for this presumption all sorts of absurd actions and ideas. Nevertheless, I find my thinking will, as time passes, be more and more in the plane of inspiration. We come to rely on it. Early on, when you start working with this, that's when it's nice to have a sponsor to bounce your absurd ideas off of. Like I met her, having accountability. As you start working with this, it's very, very important. And the 12 and 12's got a paragraph in there that I think is fabulous. It really addresses this. We've all had periods of time where we've either said this or someone's talking to us about how God's speaking to us. And they really addressed that in there in a great paragraph and said, you might want to be a little careful about that. Who's really doing the talking? And they give you a method in there to kind of check that out. We conclude the period of meditation with a prayer. So we've done this, and the book is very clear that when I get done with this stuff, I need to also then do a meditation. And I conclude it with a prayer. God, show me all through this day what my next step is to be. Please, God, give me whatever I need to take care of such problems. I ask especially, God, for freedom from self-will. Especially for freedom from self-will. Careful to make no request for myself. I may ask for myself if others will be helpful. Do not pray for my own selfish ends. I waste a lot of time.